Hi, and welcome back to Janthopodcast. This is episode 2. I'm Jared Woods. I'm the founder of Janthopodism, and I'm not really going to do a long introduction here because that's what episode 1 was about. So if you haven't heard episode 1, go ahead and listen to it, or don't. I will never know. But we're just going to move on really fast and hard from this point onwards because there's a lot of content to go through. And so, episode 2 revolves around book 1. And to give you a brief overview, book 1 is known as the external universe. The external universe is exactly what it sounds like. It's everything outside of yourself. It's extending out to infinity, all the way back down to you. It's the difference between the things you do control, sort of, and the things you don't control, sort of. But yeah, just think about it. It's the big stuff. It's the big questions. It's the cosmos. It's the God questions and other such things that we're going to go into right now. So, starting from the start, chapter 1.1, probably the most important question that anyone can kind of ask, specifically in a religious text, is, does God exist? Now, I'm going to give you the answer right now. I'm going to give you the definitive answer. So if you're ready for this, the answer is yes and no. What a cop-out. What a cop-out. How can God possibly exist and not exist? I'm going to explain this to you. How that works is that God, like everything, is a word. It's a name or a title or whatever, but it's essentially a word. And it's a complex word because it has multiple definitions. Some of these definitions are a little questionable. We kind of understand why people would be reluctant to accept them. Not pointing fingers at any kind of biblical beliefs, but people do struggle with an Old Testament kind of God who picks and chooses people and kills people and favors others and just is quite a miserable character, really. And I understand, I think we can all understand how that would be rejected by so many, but there are different definitions of God that are quite obvious that they do exist. I've banged on about Pantheism in episode 1, and I will continue to do so throughout this entire podcast, but that's where we equate the universe with God. And if you take a look around, pretty obvious that there's some sort of a reality going on. And if you equate that with God, and that's your definition of God, yeah, that exists, for sure. And, there is many religions, such as Wiccanism or the paganism or Druidism, who totally equate nature with God, which is obviously another very provable concept, and it's just another definition of God. Some people say it's the creator, and then you can say, well, then the Big Bang, is Big Bang God? Hey, why not? Some say it's the higher power. It's like, well, we can see higher powers all the time. If you don't believe in a higher power, then why don't you stop the sun? Stop the sun. Stop the earth from rotating if you don't believe in a higher power. If you are the highest power. And if you can't do that, then you're obviously not the highest power. There's obviously a power higher than you. The laws of physics, for example. So, we're looking at, in a Janthopodistic sense, we're looking at that stuff exactly. Without worrying about, is it conscious or is it unconscious? Like, that's such a human question. In our finite minds, we need it to be one or the other. It's either conscious or unconscious. Why do we think that's the highest level of anything? Why is it even a question? What we need to be looking at is from a Janthopodism perspective, we are talking about everything that has existed, everything that exists now, the entire universe as a whole, beginning from wherever, from Big Bang and before, and the evolution that's led to now. That entire thing is God in itself, according to Janthopodism's definition of a God that most definitely exists. You can even look at religions who kind of do play with this, and one thing that's always fascinating is when we look at ancient religions who they personified things. It wasn't that there was a dung beetle rolling the sun across the sky. It was a metaphorical thing, and it's not that there was necessarily a god of the crops. It was that they just personified these things to better relate to it, because as something we will discuss, and something that I think is very, very common throughout almost every religious belief, or at least in mysticism and all these, is that a certain energy you put out, a certain energy you get back. It seems that reality does respond to how we emotionally resonate with it, and I think it seems very likely that ancient religions were creating these gods in order to better communicate with the cosmos. It wasn't a literal thing. A lot of atheists look back on these things and go, that was stupid. It's like, no, actually it was very clever. If you take it literal, it gets a little bit confusing, as with even Abrahamic religions. But if you take it from a perspective of figurative deities created in order to better communicate with the laws of physics in a way that collaborates with your intentions, it's genius. And I think it's a lost art since we've kind of started to become so heavy in our brains. So basically what I'm trying to say is, don't be afraid of the word God. I find that atheists tend to obviously, they don't believe in God, but when they talk about that, they more often than not, in fact 99.9999% of the time, they're talking about an Abrahamic God. I've noticed this. They don't really even think about it from an Eastern perspective. It's generally they're talking about the God of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and that's what they say they don't believe in, which is such a tiny little scope, considering how the concept of God predates all religious organization and is so undefinable by that kind of language. So that's the answer to that. Cool. So moving on to the next thing is a new article that's I'm very proud of. It's called, chapter 1.2, Pantheism, the golden thread combining religion, science, and philosophy. Now, one thing I noticed was, the scripture, Janthopodism scripture kind of spoke about pantheism just kind of as a given. This was how it is, and this is how you define God, and that's the answer. And one thing I've noticed from feedback is that people they don't necessarily just accept that, and that makes sense. It's a very complex topic with many previous ideas, and everyone's come to their own conclusions. And so I wrote this huge essay, it's massive, showing how religion, science, and philosophy have actually all agreed with pantheism from the biggest names you can possibly think of. Almost every religion, and some of the biggest names in philosophy, from all the obviously the Greeks up until Einstein and Nietzsche and Carl Jung, obviously, and then the science side of it, as I said, Einstein massively, Isaac Newton was a pantheist, Nikola Tesla, Schrödinger, all of them. So I'm I'm not going to go through this because it's so extensive, and it took me a long time to write this. But the point is just so you, if you don't believe pantheism, doesn't really resonate with you, I've created a nice timeline of how I think a lot of people have reached their conclusions in this pantheistic sense. So if you do struggle with it, I implore you to go to the scripture and give this fairly lengthy text to read, but it's nice. It's broken up with a lot of quotes just to like affirm my case, and hopefully, it's enough to kind of take someone from point A to point B to go, okay, I can accept this, because it is quite core to Janthopodism that you do see the entire universe as a collective, as God. There are other definitions or angles to tackle this, and these are all spoken about in the text. But it's more about, sure, perhaps there is an overriding God. Perhaps there is some kind of a virtual reality thing that we're in the middle of. Who knows what those are? But as far as a tangible, provable, non-hypothetical definition of God goes, it's the collection of all the universe as a singular organism functioning together. And yeah, I've already spoken about that quite a bit, and I will continue to do so. Great. So, chapter 1.3, how to meet God right now. And this is just kind of elaborating on what we've already spoken about. Just putting more differences between Janthopodism and other religions. How there's no emphasis on life after death. We're about the life right now. And so it's not about meeting some kind of a God that's only accessible through certain techniques or a certain life lived in order to achieve and unlock a level after death. It's more about right now and connecting with God right now. And when you look at it from a pantheistic perspective, this is the development. Everything you see right now is the cutting edge development of evolution. Every person you meet, every object you touch, every article you read, my voice that you hear right now, everything is on the forefront and continues to move forward on this evolutionary development. Now, one thing we often refer to is like a life force. It has many, many names. It's the energy of all of us. It's, some chi, vitality, spirit. And yeah, just energy is the kind of the terminology that Janthopodism goes for. But, it could be some people call it your soul. It's whatever. But what it is, it's like the life. So when it's what keeps us evolving. And a good way to tell if it's contributing or not, look at a dead body. It looks exactly the same as a live body if it's just died, but there's definitely something missing. And if you cut it, it doesn't heal. If you cut a table, it doesn't heal. But cut something that's buzzing with that electricity, it heals. And that is true life, evolving, learning, contributing to the evolution of all the future, anything of the universe. So basically, the point of this chapter is just about how there's this energy that everything comes from, including yourself. There is God inside of you. You have your own bit of God, as does everything. So every time you meet someone new, every exchange, every conversation, everything, every dog you pat, or every time if a bee stings you, or there's a mudslide blocking your car, or anything crazy like that, it's you suddenly caught in a hailstorm. That is God and God. That's you, God, and another piece of God coming together to perceive one another, and in doing so growing. So yeah, that was the point of that chapter, was meeting God now is as easy as looking in the mirror or giving your mom a call. Chapter 1.4. What in God's name is God's name? What an excellent question. Obviously, it's what we spoke about before, there are so many multiple names given to God. And the point of this chapter, and it was just to kind of show how there's been so many definitions from every single walk of religion that has a word or a name that actually is very congruent with the pantheistic belief system. I'm not going to go through them, but I highly recommend you do. You just check out the scripture. It has a nice little list of different things that you can call it, and that people have called it throughout all of religious history. But just to conclude is that Janthopodism itself has settled on universal energy. We feel that that's a good enough term that it's not going to bother anyone. Even the atheists can kind of go, okay, there's definitely an energy. We can comprehend that, but for us, I tell you now, the one thing about Janthopodism is that the word God does not bother us. We love to use it. It's a great word. We often use God in inverted commas just to make sure we don't upset anyone. But there's just so much of an ugly history, and it's been tainted from people. And if you use the word God, you alienate. People reject you immediately. They go, I don't believe in that. And they freak out. And you got to go, oh, no. So we use the word universal energy like a soft pillow. So someone who has an aversion to the G word can just go, okay, no, universal energy, that sounds nice. So that's why we use that. But just know we use that interchangeably with many other names. The cosmos, the divine, the infinite, the supreme, the absolute, life, vitality, the source. All of these things are hugely they're synonymous. So, just all we're trying to say is don't be scared of the word God. But we won't use it. We'll try not to use it. It's hard. Okay. Moving on to a very big chapter. Chapter 1.5. What is the purpose of life? Tricky. So, for our purposes, we've actually split this question into two that sound like the same question, and I guess in a way they are to some people, but via Janthopodism definition, we've split them. What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? Meaning of life is a different thing. When we talk about the meaning of life, we mean like what gives it substance. Why do you get up in the morning? What's the meaning? Why why would you even bother without a meaning? And so that's more of a personal thing. Meaning is different from person to person. So that's not actually covered in this chapter, unfortunately, in this book. That'll be in book 2, the internal universe, because it's about you. And it's also just very, there's no one size fits all. So, but the purpose of life, we are discussing, because we define that as a universal concept. And how we define that, the purpose would be like, what is the purpose of life in a general sense? We can all tell you, we know what that is. It's to be born, it's to survive, it's to reproduce, and then you die. But that's a horrible thing. It's useless. It's information that's boring and been spoken about by many people. So if we keep looking at it again and remind ourselves from this perspective of the universe being a collective and as one God, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of this? And it becomes very obvious, and this is probably the most important, most fundamental part of Janthopodism that I could possibly pass on to you. And you already know this because I've already said it, but let's just put it in black and white right here. The purpose of life is evolution. There is this kind of unified, universal energy, and it's trying to evolve, or it is evolving. That's all it's ever been doing. That's its entire intention. Where is it going? We don't know. We can never know. If we knew, it would ruin the whole thing. If you suddenly knew what the purpose of the evolution of the entire universe was, you wouldn't get up and try do things. You wouldn't go to work. You wouldn't try meet the love of your life, and you wouldn't try, you wouldn't go to the gym. You would be like, oh, it would just end. It would just be like, oh, I know everything now. You could die. There would be zero. It's the curiosity that gets us. It keeps us going and keeps us asking questions and keeps us finding challenges and solving issues, and that is why we're contributing to this evolution. So we don't know. We don't know where it's going. We can never know. Unfortunately, I wish I could give you that. A lot of religions do. They go, this is the whole purpose. Don't listen to them. They don't know. That's a human being whose brain has convinced their brain and not trying to convince your brain what it all means. I'm telling you now, from even an agnostic point of view, no one in the history of mankind has ever had that information. And if anyone tells you they had that information, really not worth your time. So, but all we know for sure is that it is evolving. We can see it even in our lifetimes how it's evolved, and obviously the biological evidence is endless. But even on a technological scale, it's amazing. This evolution that continues to go and seems to just be escalating. So that's the purpose of life, and that's what we're contributing to. That's what we're a part of. We're on the cutting edge of it, and so yeah, we just gotta. That's it. So that's it. The whole thing is evolution. That's what Janthopodism is. So let's take a moment and really break that down. Considering the universe as a singular entity, the universal energy, and its only whole entire purpose is to evolve continuously. If you take it like that, then Janthopodism, in order to do your best, is to contribute to evolution from the best way you can, from the best of your ability. And that is the most essential part of our teachings. And that brings us so smoothly onto chapter 1.6, upgrading the biological operating systems of future generations. Quite a mouthful, but now we're slowly but surely moving into the bigger game. So think about evolution now. So what causes evolution? Well, if everything was in pure harmony, say there's a fish in the ocean, pure harmony with its natural environment. It has no enemies. It's just chilling. It's got enough food. You know what happens? Nothing. It kind of just stays that way. It's stagnant. It doesn't contribute anything to the evolution of all things because it doesn't need to. It's chill. But if you introduce something that threatens its species, very quickly, generation after generation of this fish is going to be born with defense mechanisms in order to deal with this problem. If it doesn't, it will die. It will become extinct. So you've got to realize that the entire point of evolution, and as designed in the system of the universal energy, is conflict. It introduces conflict intentionally in order to resolve the conflict. Conflict gets resolved one of two ways. Either you come out on top, or you die. But either which way, harmony is achieved. The conflict either wins, or you beat the conflict. But the outcome is the same. A question was asked by the universal energy, and the answer will always come. But the entire process moves the system forward by enforcing change, enforcing that things don't stand still. So we look at humans in a weird way, and we look at what we're doing to nature as a horrific thing, and I'm on the side of the fence that agrees that, yeah, there needs to be changes, and that we are damaging the environment, and we are, we're also a threat to each other, and we're a threat to animals, but this is all still part of nature. We have to remember this. It's all evolution. We are part of this. It evolved to this point. And people kind of go, no, we need to live in harmony. And like, that sounds great. And that's something I will come to in future. But it's this conflict, constant conflict, that's bringing about change and ideas and new thought paths. And, you can even look at conflict in the way of how there's this huge environmentalist push right now against the horrible resource that we're sucking from our planet, and the pollution we're shoving into the environment. There's a push against that, and that too is conflict. So when you say that, it's we've got to start looking at conflict as kind of a good thing. A thing of how we are evolving. So it's weird how people kind of go, oh, humans are the worst. Oh, humans are a plague to the planet. That's not true. We are a part of the planet. We were a natural evolution. That we didn't do this. It happened as part of a greater system. And this is all the things you see, and all the horrible things, and all the beautiful things. They're all actually part of the system to create more conflict in order to learn and contribute and evolve. And part of how this system kind of works, and this is something that's called Jung. Is that how you say his surname? He always spoke about one of his most famous things is the collective unconsciousness. About how we do pass, you look at how Darwinism passing genetic code on a physical basis, but now we're talking about actual thoughts and a consciousness that's kind of collected, that's also being passed down, mental information from generation to generation, and to be honest, not limited to humans. Even on an ecosystem basis, how things are changing to adapt to one another to ensure the survival of everything else. And this could be happening this in theory is happening on a universal scale, where things you do here could actually be passing information to anywhere in the infinities of the universe as one giant organism, a creative collection of all the data of everything that's happened, that's every thought, every event, every incident, every learning, every bit of knowledge is actually being shared. And even though we don't have that in our brains, it would blow us up individually. Think of it as the internet in a way. As a unit, as a collective, it's there, and but it's even bigger than that. Obviously, it's universal. It's what the plants are thinking. It's what the stars are thinking, I'm not saying that they necessarily think on a sentient human level, but there's information, there's learning, there's evolution, there's adaptation, and that's contributing to an entire overall system that's evolving constantly. So yeah, so that's this is also a good article for you to go read if you're actually interested in it, in the scripture, because I give there's a lot of experiments and scientific studies and evidence that kind of indicates that such a thing could exist. So that there's just this kind of mental connection between everything that's been passed on by generations. But anyway, the point is, really, what we're just trying to get to is that everything that happens passes information into a massive database to be used to further evolve everything else. including everything you've ever done, ever thought. And nothing makes it go faster than conflict. So it's all important, and you're important in the tiniest minuscule way. But if think of it as like a gigantic clock, and you can go into this huge clock, the biggest clock ever made with the most intricate parts ever, you can take out the tiniest cog, and it could stop functioning. So, it's kind of that concept. Yes, you're hugely important, but also not. In the greater scheme of things, yeah, if that kind of makes sense. But again, we will continuously go on to these things. So, kind of already covered this now, but we can move on to chapter 1.7. This is why bad things happen. Now, as discussed, conflict is the name of the game. If you don't have conflict, then you don't adapt. If you don't adapt, you don't contribute to this evolutionary system of the universal energy. So, excuse me, how you're going to look at it is like this. There is a system, like a source code, like a program running at all times as a kind of fundamental structure behind reality. Part of its core code is introducing conflict to itself and then solving it. It does this many different ways, and often in our experience, we can see how it uses us in this manner constantly. And the reason why it does that, again, is because it requires constant conflict to solve problems in order to evolve forward. Now, one of the things that people kind of go on about when it comes to bad things happening is this kind of ingrained in our genetics, this sense of overselling our worth in a way. We always believe that, and if you can look through all the scripture and all the recorded language throughout history, and there's always the sense of either that something big is about to happen. Sometimes it's an apocalyptic conclusion. Sometimes it's a mass spiritual awakening. But it always kind of results in big change, which never really kind of happens. Of course, it does happen every day in small ways, but we kind of adapt with it, and we gradually go with it, and it becomes the reality, and it becomes the norm. Massive incidents in history have taken place, but it never really seemed to be as conclusive as these prophecies have foretold since the beginning of time. Now, maybe you are one of these people, and if you're not, I'm pretty sure you know many friends who have believed right now that it's truly the end of days, and that we've really messed the world up beyond repair. Obviously, these days, environment is a huge part of conversation, and it's just easy because of the wonderful media system of provoking fear in order to get our clicks. It's quite easy to fall into that trap of thinking, oh no, everything really is buggered, hey. But it's not. It's it's both things. The truth is that it's constantly evolving and introducing more conflict, and evolving and introducing more conflict. And this conflict means that it's the conflict itself, the quality of the conflict itself is evolving. So the conflict's getting crazier and crazier, but also the resolutions are getting more profound and more beneficial and just more amazing. And so, people kind of go, everything has never been this bad, it's the worst it's ever been. And there is some truth in that. But you also got to realize that it's better than it's ever been at the same time. It's an equation of balance. That's the entire thing of evolution. That's the entire thing of reaching harmony. It's creating conflict and solving conflict. That's an imbalance and a rebalance, and an imbalance and a rebalance. And in doing so, a motion that moves forwards in evolutionary tracks. So things are constantly getting worse and better at the same time. It's never gonna, you can never say never, but in a Janthopodism kind of philosophy, it's gonna always be like that. It's gonna always seem like it's getting better or worse. And, you just have to look at it from a point of view of equality. Yes, we have a while to go, but human equality has come along leaps and bounds in genders, in racial, religious, cultural, sexual orientation. That's huge. Then look at technology, look at communication, look at travel. These are huge things, bigger than almost anything that you can think of, how we're actually unifying in more than ever. Sometimes it feels like you're taking a bit of a step back, sometimes it doesn't. But in an overall, if you had to map it out on a graph, it's easy to see by decade how we are becoming more unified and tolerant and understanding and willing to share knowledge and eager and curious about other lands and other people, and we have we have now the tools to do this stuff that 100 years ago, 200 years ago, unfathomable. I can never say that word. So, and just look at the internet. What the hell? Like, the internet didn't exist until 1982, and even then no one had it. And it used to be so slow. Look at it now. Look how fast it is. Look how this information's just like going crazy. And it's like people are like, oh, it's never been as bad as this. It's like, what are you talking about? If you had to go back 50 years, you would not deal with, first of all, the fact there was no internet. But second of all, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't do anything. Even what I'm doing now, recording this here on technology in a hostel in Florence while I travel the world, 100 years ago wasn't a conversation. And the same can go with environmental stuff. People go, oh no, global warming and climate crisis. Yes, that exists, and yes, that's a problem, and yes, we need some innovation and breakthroughs, and everyone needs to play their part, and we need governments to get involved. But you need to understand that 25 years ago, these conversations were whispers. Now they're loud, booming shouts. Now there's protests. So it's like, oh, it's never been worse. The conversation has never been better. And that's what you need. You need a certain amount of people to be on that side to push for that. So yeah, okay, so these bad things are happening, but there's good things happening too, and things are getting solved. And I tell you now, if we solve the environmental crisis, another crisis would come. COVID is a good example, but there will always be something. That's how it works. Conflict will always be introduced into the system. It's automated. It's part of the design. It has to happen. Otherwise, you fall stagnant. You don't evolve. Then you are no longer contributing to the overall universal energy and collective consciousness. You are now redundant in the entire process of the evolution of the universal energy. There is a kind of Janthopoistic theory that's why creatures go extinct. They're no longer contributing. It's a theory. It's a good theory. But, us agnostics, we don't commit to anything. But just remember, it's all divinity. It's all universal energy. It's all just is what it is. And it's beautiful. Even in the bad things, it's frickin' beautiful. So, we wrap up book 1 with chapter 1.8, What Occurs After We Die. This is a silly question. It's one of those questions that every religion seems to have an answer for. Again, we would like to remind you that no one has actually died and called us on the cosmic telephone to tell us what it's like. People have had close encounters with death, and there's been a couple of reports, but we don't believe any of that, because it's kind of seems a bit made up. Things like an afterlife are confusing from any logical standpoint, especially with the descriptions used when they talk about beautiful rivers and music that you've never heard and rainbows, and it's like, but the thing about that, why that doesn't compute, is because that's seeing and hearing and smelling and tasting and feeling, all human senses. When a person dies and they no longer have that energy which allows them to heal and allows them to grow and function, their eyes are still there, ears, nose, mouth, still there, brain. So to even say that someone has neurological capacity to be aware of the afterlife seems a little short-sighted. Not saying it's wrong, but in a Janthopodistic sense, definitely not something we commit to. When it comes to reincarnation, that seems kind of more logical in the sense that whatever that energy is leaves you. It's part of the universal energy, gets used again, sure. But the problem that we have with that is that it's kind of putting a lot of weight on the brain, because the brain will behave in a certain way, and then if the brain acts, if a person does some horrible things in their life because they were hit in the head or they were had a traumatic experience as a kid, so now this universal beautiful energy gets punished for that and gets reincarnated into a lower life form. Not saying it doesn't work that way, but again, that seems like moral herding from a religious standpoint. Also, it seems strange that the same energy would be used over and over again. We use the analogy of like squirting some water into the ocean. You know, that water doesn't stay together. It breaks apart and goes in all different directions. It's like if there's oxygen inside of a jar and you smash the jar open, it's not like that oxygen stays together forever. It slowly dissipates and spreads and merges with other things. And that's more how Janthopodism understands the universal energy to work. That's just a kind of field of energy. So when your body releases whatever it is, the soul or spirit or life force, when you die, whatever that thing that goes away, that no longer allows your body to function, it would spread apart and not. It doesn't seem. It's not like impossible. It's nothing to that we could really confirm or disagree with, or prove or disprove. It's more that it just seems so unlikely that it would retain knowledge. But then it might, and a lot of places do believe that. But again, it's so hypothetical that it seems irresponsible for any belief system to say, no, this is the right answer. And there's so many saying this with such contradictory answers that it's like, nah, we don't need to think about that. And also, if indeed we are reincarnating, how come the population is going up? 7-fold population growth in 200 years. Where are those souls coming from? So, but who's to say? And that's the exact point, is that, we, to an agnostic sense, why waste time doing anything or thinking about an afterlife? You are in a life right now. Right now. Concentrate on that. Make this amazing. That's all you got to do. That's all you should even ever think about. If you're making a decision based on what happens after you die, that is stupid and a real waste of this gift, man. So, yeah, just if there is a God in an Abrahamic sense who's watching you and judging you, I believe he or she would be very forgiving if someone used the miracle of the mind that he or she blessed us with and contemplated these things and decided that they didn't know, so they weren't going to confirm what happened after they died, and instead concentrated on the blessing of life. So that's it, and so after death, we do not talk about that ever again. It's a stupid conversation. Sorry we had to address it. One of those kind of, every religion needs to do it, so we did it. And that concludes book 1. Amazing, right? Basically just checking the boxes, of the cosmos and the bigger picture and all that. Very important stuff. But then book 2 is next, and you'll see that each book kind of becomes more and more beneficial and useful to you. Book 2 is the kind of converse side of this, the internal universe. It's you, and we focus on you and the topic about how you fit into the bigger picture, this big, scary, universal picture. Where do you belong? Don't worry, we got you. And so that's it for this round. Thank you so much for listening. Sorry it's been noisy, and I'm sorry it's been a little bit disjointed. As I say, I'm actually traveling the world. I'm in Florence right now doing this in a hostel, so it's just not ideal situations as far as recording a podcast goes, but it is an ideal situation for life. And I want to say that I lead by example, and that it speaks volumes more than what I'm saying now, that I follow Janthopodism myself, and I'm doing these really cool things. It's epic. So, if nothing else, appreciate that I'm living the dream, and it wouldn't really make sense for me to be talking about some kind of overall universal perspective if I was miserable, having the worst time. I'm not. So that's it from me. Book 2 coming soon, and appreciate you listening. Thanks for coming to my Jared talk. Strapline. Goodbye.